everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am Tracy Stuckroth, your host, and I am not in my home office, as you can tell. I am actually in a hotel room in Texas, and I'm excited to be on the road and giving you this educational session on allergen labeling or labeling on alcoholic beverages. So I'm very excited to do that, bring that conversation to you here. So it's called Raising the Bar. We need clear alcohol labels now. And we'll get into why that is. And my guest right here, I got my finger right, is Eva Greenthal. She's a senior policy scientist at the Center for Science for the Public Interest, where she oversees the organization's food labeling campaigns, leveraging the food label as a powerful public health tool, which I love, to influence consumer and industry behavior. And if you listen to me regularly, you know that I have a head cold, or I sound like I have a head cold, so excuse me for that, but it won't stop me from talking about this conversation. So hello and welcome to the show, Eva.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm excited for you to be here. And I found you in the Allergic Living article I think that was last month or 2 months ago, talking about the allergen labeling on alcohol, making progress to required rules. So I'll share that link with everybody to that article from Allergic Living. But can you tell everybody what the Center for Science for the Public Interest does and what exactly you do overseeing the campaigns?
Absolutely. So Center for Science in the Public Interest, which I'll be referring to as CSPI, we were founded in 1971, and we have a really long-standing reputation for being your food and health watchdog. We really pride ourselves as being an independent, science-based consumer advocacy organization. Our work has primarily focused on improving the food system to support healthy eating. I always like to mention that our funding largely comes from subscriptions to Nutrition Action, which is our health newsletter, and also from member contributions and foundation grants. We are completely free of corporate or government influence because we're a corporate and government watchdog. And then I'll just kind of read you our mission, which is to advocate for evidence-based and community-informed policies on nutrition, food safety, and health, hold government agencies and corporations to account, and empower consumers with independent, unbiased information to live healthier lives. So that's what CSPI is all about.
That's awesome. So it really is, we put these policies out and then we just want to make sure that they're accurate.
Absolutely. Yes. We advocate for policies that will support public health in our labeling space. We really push for transparencies to give consumers the option and empower them to make healthy choices, for people with food allergies to avoid foods that could cause them harm, and also to ensure there's proper regulation of things like misleading claims on food labels, make sure that there's just a very transparent information landscape for people.
Well, and before the show, you were talking about how you went at Tufts, what you were studying, and it reminded me of Marion Nestle. Do you know Marion Nestle?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. So I went to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, and she was a guest speaker at that program, and this was back in 2009. And she got on stage and she was explaining how what is allowed, the only, I'm going to say, truth is in the white box. Right on the side of a package.
Yep, on the nutrition facts label. Yes. So I don't know that there's a single person at my organization who hasn't been inspired by Marion Nestle. She's an absolute leader in our field, in the field of nutrition and nutrition policy, and she has a blog that she runs today that she really knows how to hold industry to account. And
yes, she does.
She's really wonderful.
Yes. Okay, so today we're talking about, I'm going to put this back up here. We want to talk about clear alcohol labels. So can you tell me what is currently regulated to be on alcohol labels? And when I look at an alcohol label, there's not much. And is that accurate?
Right. So I think it would take me Less time to tell you what's currently required on alcohol labels and longer to describe but the way I think of it is almost everything we consume, from foods to dietary supplements to over-the-counter medications, is required to have some kind of serving facts labeling. So foods have to have the serving size, servings per container, calories, nutrients, a list of ingredients, and allergen disclosures.
Okay.
And then medications have to also have not just a list of ingredients, but the quantity of each ingredient. Alcoholic beverages are treated differently than all these other product categories, and they're really not currently required to have any serving information at all.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it doesn't even tell you like to use a jigger. Right.
So they have marketing information on them, and they might choose voluntarily to tell you about some cool recipes you can make with the product. They might tell you their company's story. On the wine bottles, you'll find imagery of beautiful vineyards, but it's almost as if the alcohol companies want to make sure that you're thinking about everything other than your health and things like nutrition and safety when you're drinking. And that's where policy comes in as an important sort of way to make sure companies are telling you everything you need to know, not only what they want you to know.
So why is this coming to the forefront now? What brought it to the forefront?
Great question. I think there's a lot of factors. I will say a big one is, so this is something my organization, CSPI, has been working on for really decades. Back in 2003, we filed what's called a citizen petition with the agency that oversees alcohol labeling, which is called the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. I'll probably calling it the TTB throughout this conversation. So we filed a petition asking the TTB to require serving facts labels on alcohol. We wanted to see nutrition information, calories, ingredients lists. And the agency did nothing for almost 2 decades. And in, I believe it was 2022, our lawyers sued the TTB for failing to act on our petition. So that triggered a process of discussions with that agency, and they agreed to take this up and to issue rulemakings, so to issue new policies to require information on alcohol labels. So it's a really active policy area right now. We're expecting to see new policy proposals really any day now. On top of that, there is this increased attention on people wanting to know what's in our food, what additives are being added to our beverages, our foods and beverages, and that includes alcohol. Currently, there's campaigns around unsafe additives like red dye number 3 in loops and different things that people really want to see outside our food supply. In the alcohol space, we can't even have campaigns like that because we don't know what's in it. We can't know what we don't know, and so that's part of why this is so important.
So the importance of the alcohol content, the nutrition, and the allergen information, because you wouldn't know that if you're looking at a bottle of gin, right, that there are different things that are used in that to make that gin that could be allergens. And the percentage, they're required to put the percentage of alcohol on it, correct? Like
on gin, yes, it is required. Well, it's required on products with above a certain percent of alcohol, but below. So beers, you often see it. Some states have percent alcohol by volume requirements, but at the federal level, percent alcohol by volume is not even required on all beers or wines, which is one of the many aspects that we really want to see required for all alcoholic beverages. Because again, people don't know the details of the laws. They don't know that they don't see an alcohol by volume label because it's below 7%. They just can't find the information and don't know why.
Right. Yeah. And as a college student, I probably wasn't even looking at that, but I know that there are people who do, right? Yeah. So why is it, I mean, you kind of said it before, but people are really wanting to know where our food comes from and our beverages and what's in them. And so that's really kind of the biggest push towards that right now.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different reasons that the different pieces of information that we want to see on alcohol labels are important. I'd love to start with alcohol content information. So when I talk about alcohol content, I'm talking about serving size, number of servings per container, and then also how those translate into standard drinks. So
that would be awesome.
Yeah. So public health guidelines for lower risk drinking are put out in terms of standard drinks. And a standard drink is whatever amount of a beverage provides 0.6 ounces of pure alcohol. So currently the US guidelines say men should drink no more than 2 drinks per day and women no more than 1 drink per day. That's standard drinks.
Okay.
But it's almost impossible to follow that advice if you don't know how many standard drinks are in your drink, your can of beer. And so as an example, like a 16-ounce can of light beer might have just 1 standard drink. But the same size can of a higher alcohol, stronger craft beer might have 2 standard drinks, but it really looks like 1 drink. So people might have no idea.
Wow.
Yep. That's a safety hazard. People might think it's safe to drink because they only had 1 drink. They don't realize they had 2. God forbid they have 2 cans of a strong craft beer, think they had 2 drinks and they had 4, and they might get behind the wheel. And that's really dangerous. So we really want to see standardized drink labeling. It's something that has been implemented in other countries. And we deserve nice things here too.
We do. We definitely do. So, and I guess a bartender would know what a standard drink is, and that's where they use the jiggers, right? To make that pour.
Yes, I think with shots and measuring things like that, it can be variable, but there are at least some systems in place to standardize the amount of alcohol when you're at a bar.
Exactly. And I have a client who wants me to measure, see what the hotel is, what is their actual pour, their regular pour, if they're free pouring or if they're using the jigger, because that's actually a really good understanding and safety issue too. Like if they're just free pouring, you're arguing that over that standard drink size. Definitely
a best practice to use the jigger as shot glass.
So are there and this came up in a podcast episode, I think, or maybe in a conversation in the last couple of weeks too, non-alcoholic versus alcoholic beverages. And is there different labeling regulations for non-alcoholic beverages versus, because they're not, non-alcoholic is not regulated by how do we say that? The
TTB, yeah.
Yeah, TTB.
Yes. So like you alluded to, it really comes down to what federal agency regulates the product. The FDA regulates most of our foods and beverages and non-alcoholic beverages. And if a food is regulated by FDA, it is required to have that full nutrition facts label, the full ingredients list, the major allergen disclosures. And then if it's an alcoholic beverage regulated by the TTB, it isn't required to have any of those. There are a few alcoholic beverages regulated by the FDA. Usually hard ciders fall under FDA. Some, but not all, of the hard seltzers on the market. So you will occasionally see nutrition facts and other labeling on FDA-regulated beverages, but the vast majority of alcohol falls under TTB, where there's no labeling requirements.
And can I ask you had to sue them to get them to look at this, to look at your proposal. Is that right? Is that the right word?
Petition.
Okay. I knew it was a P. So why was it not done in the past? Is it just they never thought about it, or is it from lobbying? from or?
Bingo. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
really, the biggest barrier is just a lack of political will to stand up to powerful industry interests. And the beer, wine, and spirits industries have lobbied hard against any new regulations. They argue that it's expensive to change product labels. They argue that mandatory information will limit the space they need for those pictures of beautiful vineyards and such. But our response to that is it's clear that companies can stay in business while adopting transparent labeling practices. There are thousands upon thousands of food and beverage companies across the country that comply with FDA's requirements, and we have a very thriving small food business sector. So no company likes new regulation, but these are things that are very much in the public interest, and that's the role of government, is to protect the public, promote transparency.
Right. Now, and when you're thinking about the labeling on these alcoholic beverages, are you wanting it on the box or on the bottle?
We want to see it on every individual bottle because you're not always looking at the outer packaging. People are interacting with each individual bottle and need to be able to check it there.
And how does it come, because the story was in the Allergic Living magazine, where does the whole allergen aspect of this? Do you see a lot of allergens in alcohol, whether beer, wine, and spirits?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there definitely are allergens in alcoholic beverages. In terms of major allergens, wheat is in all beers. You think of some liqueur products like Bailey's have milk in them. Those are things people typically know, but then there are the ones that are more unexpected. So there's a type of Mexican beer called a chelada that is usually made with oyster juice. So there's shellfish in those. People might not know that when they look to try one of those. Wines are a little more strictly regulated in which ingredients they're allowed to contain. There's a specific list of ingredients allowed in wine. It's not a short list, but on that list, there are 3 ingredients derived from egg, milk, and fish, which are major allergens. So there can be allergens in wine as well. And then, so there are lots of allergens that show up in alcoholic beverages. And one of my biggest gripes is that alcohol labels often tell you what they do not contain. So they might be labeled gluten-free. They might be labeled dairy-free. But the ones that do contain gluten or do contain dairy don't tell you. And so you're left with this landscape where people with celiac disease, for example, have to pay a premium for products labeled gluten-free as a marketing claim, because that's the only way for them to ensure they're not consuming something with gluten. In the food space, it's much easier because there's an ingredients list on every single product, not just claims on certain premium products.
Well, and that's one of my biggest pet peeves on just going down a buffet at a restaurant, at a hotel. It'll say dairy-free and gluten-free, but I don't know what's in the other one, right? I can't. It makes me uncomfortable knowing, right? Did you just forget it, right? So.
Right.
Yeah. So do you have any examples or personal stories that can highlight the risks posed by the lack of allergen labeling on alcoholic beverages? I mean, I know Allergic Living is on some, but are there anything that you're using as case studies to show the TTB?
So we always love when people join us to share their own personal stories with the TTB, with any lawmakers that we meet with. I'll share a story from someone I recently spoke with. So I talked to a woman, actually a neighbor of mine, whose husband has now twice had anaphylactic reactions to 2 different craft beers. It's been incredibly traumatic for both of them. They now carry an EpiPen at all times. He drinks other beers with no issue, but not these, so far, 2 particular craft beers. And the problem is that since there's no ingredients lists, he can't figure out what ingredient it is in those two beers that's causing his reactions. And this is someone who's a beer lover, and he's really left with two bad options. He can either stop trying new craft beers and only drink the ones he knows are safe because he's tried them already, or he can pursue his love of craft beer, but at risk to his own life. And it's just not fair to put people in that position. And it's not even in the interest of companies to want people to try their products.
Right. And has he reached out to those companies to see if they will share the ingredients?
That I don't know. And I do know that a lot of people with food allergies spend countless hours contacting companies asking what's in products. And I really think that's an unfair burden to put on people with food allergies.
Yeah. Well, and the joke that I make a lot is that the Bush's baked bean, the dog has the recipe. I'm like, we don't want your recipe. We just want to know your ingredients so that we don't die.
Pretty simple.
Or we don't. Will the labeling come down to vegan and vegetarianism as well, or just kind of allergens?
So that's kind of the same thing where currently what you see on labels is the marketing claim, vegan wine. Whereas with an ingredients list, a person who is vegan can go through the ingredients list and identify whether or not it has any ingredients derived from egg, milk.
Right. The one website, do you know Barnivore?
No.
There's a website called Barnivore, and you can go on. They actually have a full listing. I say full, a very comprehensive listing of beers and spirits, beers, wines, and you can search to see if they're vegan or vegetarian.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the chat here. But I've been using that for a long time. And so I give that to meeting planners all the time if you're looking for trying to figure out if something is vegan or vegetarian, beverage-wise, alcoholic beverage-wise. And I'll put that in our private chat too, so you have it. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, I mean, but unfortunately too, just based on my friends from Two Alpha Gals and that new foundation that they've started too, is that mammal aspect of ingredient labels for veganism. I mean, it's really trying to figure out what that's made of too. So interesting, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one more reason that we need more transparent alcohol labels is it's not just people with allergies. It's not just people with food sensitivities. It's also people just who want to practice certain diets and have certain food preferences. And we haven't even gotten into the issue of sort of nutrition labeling in people with particular health conditions, where people with diabetes who count their carbs need to know how many carbs are in a product, things like that.
Right. So that would be part of the allergy. So it would look basically like the nutrition label on a regular pack on a food.
It would look similar. What we're advocating for is really quite similar, where you have the serving size and servings per container. We would add a line for standard drinks per serving and per container. Okay. And then similar to foods and non-alcoholic beverages, you would have calories and then the nutrients. And then typically you see the ingredients list underneath that with a contains statement telling you which major allergens are in there, or within the ingredients list, a highlighting of the allergens in the list.
And using the top 9 list that the FDA put out.
That's what we're asking for. Yeah, it makes sense for everything we consume to just be aligned. Nobody knows which products are regulated by which agency. Nobody cares. Nobody should have to care. Be a consistent information landscape for people.
Well, and that even brings up the USDA, right? Because they regulate the meats and the poultries versus think unless it's packaged.
Yeah, and USDA does a pretty good job of aligning its labeling policies with FDA. When FDA adopted the nutrition facts label for most packaged foods, USDA followed by adopting the same exact nutrition facts label for USDA regulated foods. And so alcohol is a little bit different in certain ways just because of that sort of alcohol content issue, standard drink issue, but they can certainly follow FDA and USDA's lead and make slight adaptations, but basically adopt the same policies that those agencies have spent so much time and thought crafting already.
Right. Now, parts per million just came up when you were talking about the size of drinks and things like that. I mean, because that's what under the gluten-free labeling that we have, but it has to be under 10 parts per million, right? Or is it 20 here?
I don't know exactly what it is. I know there is a cutoff.
Right.
Yeah. But again, gluten-free can only get you so far. It's arguably more useful for people who want to avoid gluten to be able to see if gluten is in any of the ingredients. Yeah. And that's actually something we'd like to see added to the major allergens. And they have that in many countries where it's major allergens and gluten-containing grains. Here, wheat is a major allergen, but rye and barley are also ingredients that can contain gluten and aren't currently labeled as major food allergens. So
exactly. Yeah. And it's the EU
and USDA and TTB. That's another story. At least we can get the first 9 on alcohol, right?
Right. Exactly. How I'm sure you've been doing a lot of talking to people with food allergies and different dietary restrictions. And I know I had a conversation with Erin Mallar earlier this year back in Food Allergy Awareness Month about alcohol labeling. And we also had chatted with 2 people in the UK that it is labeled on there, alcohol. And so what are you getting besides CSPI? Are there other organizations and individuals really kind of advocating for this? And Erin's with Allergy Strong. So is it a group effort to push this through?
Absolutely. 2 of the biggest groups that we've been collaborating with on the allergy side are FARE, Food Allergy Research and Education, and then AFA, which is Allergy and Asthma Foundation of America. Both of those groups and their membership are very passionate about more transparent allergen labeling for alcohol, and they've played a role in sort of collecting stories from people about the challenges they face. And us for meetings with the TTB and with regulators to really communicate the urgency and the need for the policy changes that we're pushing for. And that's something that we're planning to continue. I think at this point, like I mentioned at the beginning, we've made a lot of progress towards getting this back on the radar of government. We are expecting and hoping to see some proposed policies on this topic come out really any day now, but they are continuing to be delayed. And so our job now is just to keep pushing for them to come out and also to make sure we are out there communicating that this should remain a priority in government as there is this upcoming transition of administrations.
Right.
It's not a partisan issue. It's just basic transparency, and people on both sides of the aisle, everybody deserves and wants to know what's in our food.
Exactly. Now, when you're pushing these policies, I'm like, and I know it happens a lot in advocacy, when you sit down with somebody and you kind of walk through the different things and you share the stories, has that really kind of helped push this through? Or what have been the biggest barriers is it just the organization itself or specific people? I mean, don't name people, but specific levels of the TTB that are just like not doing this, or how does that help? Did that make a question?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes back to the tension between what consumers want and what industry wants. And I think it is always useful to tell your story and to share those stories with the TTB. I think a challenge has been making it clear that the TTB has a responsibility in the fact that they regulate alcohol labeling to promote public health. The TTB is an agency within the Treasury Department, whereas the FDA is an agency within Health and Human Services. So at FDA, they very much understand that their mission is to protect the public health. At TTB, because it's in Treasury, they are more used to playing a taxation role. They're more used to being more of a financial regulator. And it's not like there's a huge staff at TTB focused on public health. So it's really also about making sure the agency knows and is thinking about alcohol labeling from a public health lens and understanding that they have a responsibility, if they're going to be the ones regulating alcohol, to ensure that labels are transparent and support health and safety. And if they are not able to achieve that, I think we really need to be rethinking whether alcohol labeling should sit in that agency.
Right. Or just alcohol production should sit under that agency, right? Yeah. Yeah. It does come down to lobbying and I'm going to say deep pockets, because it's the taxation of that. I mean, I know that each state is different in how they tax and how you can buy the alcohol, et cetera, as well. So like in the state of North Carolina, where I live, you have to go to the ABC store to get it, which is buying it in a general store. So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one of the other tricks that the industry lobbyists use when there's a sort of threat of regulation from the government is to say, no need to regulate us. We can do it on our own. I don't think we've touched yet on sort of the voluntary initiatives that we've seen. So in 2013, the TTB announced a voluntary policy. So they created a serving facts label for alcohol, and they put it out there and said to companies, if you'd like, you can use this voluntary label. You don't have to. And this was 10 years after we filed a petition asking for something mandatory. They came out with something instead voluntary. And this is pretty common it's a very classic tactic of industry to push for a voluntary policy rather than mandatory. Mm-hmm. And our role as consumer watchdogs are to say, okay, industry, you said you think a voluntary policy is sufficient. Let's see if you're actually using it. So we did a study at CSPI to see, are beer, wine, and spirits companies actually using the voluntary labels? So we looked at labels from 2021. We looked at the top 150 beer, wine, and spirits brands. And what we found is very low uptake of the voluntary serving facts labels. So the relatively highest compliance was in the beer sector, where about a third of beer brands were using the serving facts label. In spirits, it was 12%. And we couldn't find a single wine brand using the serving facts label. So even with beer having the highest compliance, that's still just a third. That means thirds of beers on the market have no nutrition labeling whatsoever. So not where we would get with a mandatory policy where we would see 100% on all three sectors. And I think it just really points to the need for a mandatory policy, and the industry's had plenty of time to go the voluntary route, and they just haven't come through.
Now, when this policy, if the regulations are passed, what steps will be required to ensure compliance and consumer awareness? I mean, when MAD came out here, or even cigarettes, there's the statements that you must consult before drinking alcohol, et cetera. There's those statements out. What are you guys pushing for as far as required to ensure compliance?
Yeah, so compliance, I'll do compliance and consumer awareness are two separate things. For compliance, labeling policies tend to have really high compliance when they're mandatory. And one of the ways that I think that can be ensured in the alcohol space is the TTB already actually approves every single label before it enters the market. There's a pre-market label approval process. And so because of that, the TTB will be able to make sure that all of any mandatory information is present on the label. So I think compliance will be pretty smooth. In terms of consumer awareness, I think it's absolutely critical that if a big change like this is coming that will affect anybody who drinks alcohol, that they know it's coming, they know how to use and understand what they're going to start seeing on labels. They know what standard drinks means. Use that, what the federal guidance on moderate drinking is, things like that. I think the news media can play a good role in that, just coverage of the new policy and interviews with advocates and government officials talking about why it's important and how it will benefit people. I think social media will play a big role. Influencers celebrating the transparency and also calling out things based on new information they have. I think people are going to be shocked to see some of the additives in products they commonly consume. I think it's possible that just the concept of a new requirement to disclose the ingredients could cause certain companies to actually change what they're putting in the products because they don't want people to know they were putting bad additives in the products. So, but then for those that continue to put those ingredients that people will be surprised to see, I think we'll see some reaction on social media, which is, I think, a very healthy way for the public to pressure companies.
Yeah. Well, and it brings up, I interviewed a gentleman he's director of operations for a hotel in the UK. And when the UK labeling came out on unpackaged food, they have to put all the nutritional information on their catering buffets. They got that information back and they're like, holy crap, look at all the calories, look at all this stuff. And so they removed some of those recipes from their recipe book and or reconfigured them because of that, because they're like, we had no idea. That's what.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've seen that with other nutrition labeling policies around the world. I don't know if you're familiar with the front of package nutrition labeling policies in Latin America. It's really led the charge. So in Mexico now and in Chile, you have to have these sort of stop signs on the front of packaged foods that say high in sugar, high in calories, high in sodium, if the products are above a certain threshold. In Chile, which was one of the first countries to adopt that type of policy, they've done a lot of evaluation and found huge decreases in sugar in particular, sugar and calories in packaged foods, which it's a huge win for public health to have a policy that's designed around transparency, spur product reformulation in a way. In the public health nutrition field, we see product reformulation as such a big win because it doesn't even require anything from the individual in terms of changing their habits. It's this systems level change where the food just gets healthier. You don't have to do anything different. You can keep eating the same foods, but they're healthier now. So
wow, that's huge.
The power of food labeling and sort of what I mean by changing both individual and consumer behavior through food labeling policy.
Well, and even the manufacturer. I mean, I know they're making it, but do they even really kind of look at that stuff in some respects, right? You're selling this, but how can consumers get involved in helping you push this through?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to get involved. Like we talked about before, just telling your story, reaching out to your representatives in Congress to share your stories and what's important to you, what policies you want to see prioritized and why can be really powerful. Once there's a policy proposal on the table around new alcohol labeling rules, there will be a avenue for public participation. There's this process for any new government regulation where there's a comment period. It's usually about 60 days, and anybody can submit a comment, short or long, a story, anything, to what's called a docket at regulations.gov. If you follow CSPI on social media or sign up for our action alerts, that is a great way to know when the comment period opens. And we usually create a really easy, seamless way for members of the public to weigh in on the policy through an action alert. So you can go to our Take Action page. We have we'll write out a pre-written letter to TTB. You can edit it and tweak it however you want, add your story, anything like that. Press send, and then they'll hear from you.
Okay, awesome. I just put your Instagram handle up there. I'm going to go find the other, I'll just get the website link.
Yeah, I can also look for how to sign up for our action alerts.
Okay, perfect.
Should have had that up.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, you can put it in the private chat. I don't know if you can put it in the comments yourself or not, but make sure that they're there. Yeah, because that's really important because, I mean, we do have a voice and you're helping us give a voice to that. There was one thing that I asked you before the show, and I think it was, what is the best practice that you've seen in creating this, as you with sustainable and inclusive food and beverage experiences? And the one thing that I loved that you said was that the policy making. So tell me more about how that really plays into this, and because rules are just put out there sometimes, right? Without thinking through.
Yeah. I love that you asked me sort of what is a safe, sustainable, inclusive beverage and food experience mean to me? And my thoughts on that are at CSPI, we work to pass policies that transform the food environment so that safe, healthy, sustainable food is accessible for everyone. And the biggest issue we face is the influence that large corporations have on shaping our food choices, on shaping our food environment. And I think when the public and communities are involved in designing policies to shape their local food environments, to shape the policies that inform what our food environment looks like, healthy, joyful food experiences follow from that.
That's awesome. Yeah, because you've said it before. I mean, it comes back to the stories, right? And I mean, because I just saw one of my friends who has celiac disease was listening to us on Instagram, and another friend's husband is in the industry selling the alcohol, and I believe like it was the glue that gluten is in when you're making the barrels and a variety of different things, that there's gluten in those products that are not actually added, but it's in the machinery or it's in the equipment that the beverages are stored in.
Yeah. And you have to talk to someone with celiac disease to know that, right? You have to have a family member or be a policymaker who wants to listen to people tell their stories, because our policies should be shaped by the needs of everyone. So very much always advocating for people to tell their stories, participate in the policymaking process. That's how our democracy functions. And it's a beautiful thing that our voices can be heard and influence the policies that shape our environments.
Awesome. So because you answered my sustainable, inclusive food and beverage experience. So what is one thing that you want people to do and pay attention to in the upcoming, because you said you're expecting it in days. So let's cross our fingers, right, that you see something. So what's the next step?
Yes. So the next step will be to comment, to read the policy that's being proposed and to comment on it. And if you sign up for our action alerts or follow CSPI's pages, you'll see us talking about that, sharing our thoughts on what's good and where there's room for improvement in the policy proposals. We'll submit comments. We'll make sure people have an easy way to submit their own comments. So I would just follow along. And I think what we're looking for is for the TTB to put out policies that are mandatory, not voluntary. That's absolutely crucial, because the current voluntary policies just aren't working. We want full transparency, full ingredients lists, full nutrition information, clear and easy to understand alcohol content information. We want it to be required in a format that people can really access and understand. We don't want to see tiny type. We don't want to see it hidden behind a QR code. That's one thing industry has pushed for. We want it on the package, on every single package, just like it is on FDA regulated foods and beverages. So those are the kinds of things we'll be looking out for when we read through the policy proposals. And so the next phase is to keep pushing for those rules to be published. And then once they are, make your voice heard about what you think of them. And then after that, just to build it out to the final stage, is those policy proposals get put out. The public can comment on them. The TTB will read through everyone's comments and then finally put out a final rule that's informed by everybody's input.
And when they put that final rule out,
once the final rule is out, there's a compliance period. So maybe they give companies a couple of years, a year or two to comply. Maybe they give small companies a little bit longer. And then we see transparent information on all of our products.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I was talking about, I'm in Texas today, so I was asking about a law, about Sergio Lopez food allergy awareness law that was enacted in September of last year, but became effective this year on September 1st. And the hotel I'm in was like, don't even know what you're talking about. And yeah, so when we're done, I'm calling the health department, but just to find out how they're going to.
That's that compliance piece.
Exactly. Yeah. The whole compliance piece of it. And it's really and even when the food code came out in 2022, the updated food code, it said unpackaged food should be labeled for the top 9 allergens. And like, I think there's 6 or 7 states now that have said, hey, we're using this food code as is. And when I called one of them, they're like, well, we're just going to do it. I'm like, okay, how are you going to enforce it? How are you going to make people comply to labeling the unpackaged food, especially when you're talking about a hotel or a catering company? Which brings me to a question that popped up when you were talking is when you're getting, I'm just going to use Reese's for example. If you take a Reese's, the little tiny ones, right, out of the bag, that information is not on that little Reese's peanut butter cup. But so then jumping to the airplane bottles, right? You have a bottle of Bacardi and then you have the airplane bottle of Bacardi. That information would be that little tiny font. How would that, I mean, they're going to come up with that.
They'll have to have guidance on that. I don't know a ton about the sort of not packaged for individual sale, but I think there's requirements where like if you have a bag of individual foil wrapped Reese's cups, it probably says not for individual sale. But then I'm picturing a checkout aisle, there's candy bars. Sometimes they're very small. If they are for individual sale, they do need to have information on the label. There's some exceptions for formatting to make it more doable, but there's no exemptions for if you're selling a product on an individual basis, it has to have the nutrition information. So I don't know, people call them different things in different parts of the country. We call them nips, those tiny bottles.
Yeah. You call them nips? I've never heard that. Wow. Okay.
I don't know if so I'm from Chicago, but I've lived in the Boston area for a long time. I don't know if it's a Chicago thing or a Boston thing. Or I went to college in Michigan. Maybe it's a Michigan thing, but we call them nips.
It's funny. I've never heard that term.
So yeah, nips. I think that's one of those kind of small package, not exemptions. It shouldn't be entirely exempt, but there's probably going to be some formatting allowances for how that information can be displayed to make it doable on such a small container.
Okay. This is so fascinating, and thank you so much for doing this work.
Thank you so much for inviting me to share about it. It was a real pleasure.
I really, really appreciate it. Okay, everybody, you can reach Eva on LinkedIn and I put there's her LinkedIn profile with all the HTTP stuff in front of it as well. And then I also put the links to CSPI and the action things in the comments. So make sure you're following, and if you're really interested in this, and even if it's just intriguing to you, follow CSPI. And Eva, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Really appreciate it.
And you're welcome. And when they come out, I would love to have you back on the show to talk about what they are and what needs to be, what the timelines are and all of that stuff.
Fabulous. I would love to do that.
Okay. Well, everybody stay safe and eat well. Until next time, go on to the thrivemeetings.com website, which is my main company, and my meal cards. I don't have anything with them. I'm doing a Black Friday sale, 25% off of all of the meal cards that you can have your attendees give to servers to help identify themselves when they're being fed their dishes. And I will not be online next week because it's Thanksgiving week, and I'm going to take a day to bake and get ready for Thanksgiving. So, Eva, happy Thanksgiving to you.
Same to you.
Thank you. Everybody have a good day and stay safe and eat well.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.